إذا أوذي في الله جعل فتنة الناس كعذاب الله ولئن جاء نصر من ربك ليقولن إنا كنا معكم أوليس الله بأعلم بما في صدور العالمين وليعلمن الله الذين آمنوا وليعلمن المنافقين وقال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا اتبعوا سبيلنا ولنحمل خطاياكم وما هم بحاملين من خطاياهم من شيء إنهم لكاذبون وليحملن أثقالهم وأثقالا مع أثقالهم وليسألن يوم القيامة عما كانوا يفترون ولقد أرسلنا نوحا إلى قومه فلبث فيهم ألف سنة إلا 50 عاما فأخذهم الطوفان وهم ظالمون فأنجيناه وأصحاب السفينة وجعلناها آية للعالمين وإبراهيم إذ قال لقومه اعبدوا الله واتقوه ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون إنما تعبدون من دون الله أوثانا وتخلقون إفكا إن الذين تعبدون من دون الله لا يملكون لكم رزقا فابتغوا عند الله الرزق واعبدوه واشكروا له إليه ترجعون وإن تكذبوا فقد كذب من قبلكم وما على الرسول إلا البلاغ المبين آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم
Before we continue, for all the marhum mu'mineen and mu'minat, the ulama, the shuhada, and particularly our brothers and sisters, the shuhada of Lebanon and Palestine, let us remember them all with a Surah Al-Fatiha. Alhamdulillah, we're fortunate once again to be joined by Shaikh Reza as our speaker for these 4 nights. And so, inshallah, without any further ado, I'd like to request our respected guest scholar to begin the lecture. To please welcome him with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Wow. الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلق أجمعين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم من الآن إلى يوم الدين. من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم لقد جاءكم رسول من أنفسكم عزيز عليه ما عنتم حريص عليكم بالمؤمنين رؤوف رحيم صدق الله العلي العظيم صلى الله عليه وسلم. Dear brothers and sisters in Iman, elders, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is of course a pleasure to be amongst all of you once again, albeit in very difficult times. These are very troubling days that we've been experiencing, we've been living through for now more than a month, with the events going on in Gaza, in the West Bank, in South Lebanon, and across the region, the Middle East, place where we all call, or many of us call home. But it is not just a set of events, a crisis affecting that region, it's a crisis affecting the entire region. Both as well, the events that are happening in Gaza and in Palestine, but also in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Kashmir, all across the Muslim world. We're having one crisis after another. Moments of crisis are actually important for us. They are moments in which we can reflect, take a moment out of our busy schedules to understand what is it that we are doing wrong. A lot of times when we're going about our daily lives, it's very easy for us to forget all of the rot, all of the evil, and all of the terrible vices that are continuing and that are seeping into our own personal lives, the lives of our families and our communities, and at the largest level, the lives of our societies and our world. And so, a few years ago, when the events in Turkey, the earthquake in Syria and Turkey occurred, a lot of people were shocked. A developing country with all of these buildings, these high-rises, somewhat advanced, all of those buildings crumbled with just an earthquake. It was a terrible earthquake. But that earthquake allowed for those people to now reflect on what were the building standards that people were using. What were the cut corners that these developers were taking advantage of? What is this society going towards? And in these moments of crisis, it allows us to then reflect on the rot, those cut corners that we have to face, whether sooner or later. In the events of Palestine, this is not anything new. Many of us, in these past few weeks, we have been getting a lesson in the importance of history. A lot of times people will say the recent events started in and on the day of October 7th. And so then the conversation begins in the middle. And we say, for example, do you condemn this group or do you condemn that group? Are innocent lives and innocent civilians, are they protected or are they not protected? And all of these questions and all of these criticisms are held up against one side so that you can divert your attention from the larger context. We have all been getting a lesson in the importance of history. And so when we talk to, for example, our coworkers, when we talk to our friends, when we talk to people on the street, when we are at these protests, or even when we talk to our representatives, whatever way we try to further the conversation, we say the events of Gaza, the crisis of Greater Palestine did not begin on October 7th. We understand the importance of history. Because if you look in the history of these recent events, you'll see that just in the past 17 or so years, since 2007, Gaza was under a severe blockade. We talk about the water being stopped, electricity being stopped, fuel not reaching the people of Gaza, food, all of these different things. Do we ask ourselves, well, why is it that Israel has to send food and water and fuel and electricity to Gaza? According to UN reports, this isn't, my statistics. It's not statistics of one side or another. According to UN statistics, I believe in the year 2021 or 2022, they said that over 70%, around 78% of the pipes, the water pipes of Gaza, were not drinkable. The water that was flowing into Gaza before this recent crisis, over 78% of that was not even drinkable. It was not for human consumption. So now you say you turn off the water. Even that dirty water, even that filthy water was turned off. We talk about, for example, why isn't it that Gaza has water treatment plants? Because after years and years of bombardments, you bombard, you destroy water treatment plants, and you don't allow them to be repaired. You destroy the energy source. You destroy the power plant of the city of Gaza, and you don't let it be repaired. You destroy all of the infrastructure of the city of Gaza, so then, when the time comes, you can turn off the tap. That is the context. That is why, at least partially, we are here. That's not even talking about the 100 or so years, if you want to talk about since the Nakba, the 75 or so years of events, refugee after refugee. Over 1 million of the residents of this city of Gaza, this small strip of land, are refugees, even before these most recent events. Generation after generation of refugees. We might all know, or some of us at least, those of us who are a little bit more informed, we might know these statistics, but these events tell us that history is important for us to understand the context and to understand better where we are and how we can move forward. That's one of the benefits of history. We can better understand how we got to the place that we got to. And then it can tell us, once we have figured out the exact problem and identified the true issue, then we can look at what the possible solutions could look like. Now, I can't determine what that solution is. And really none of us who are sitting here can determine what that solution could look like. The people whose lands were taken away, the people whose homes were taken away, they are the ones who can say, I will either forgive or I will not forgive. It is their voices that have to be lifted up. It is their claims that we have to really call for justice towards. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so if we want to understand the events of our day and age, how we got to where we are and how we can move forward, we really have to understand history. But history isn't just good for us to understand our political or our social situation. In fact, Allah tells us to look at history so that you can understand where you stand morally and what you must do in relation to Allah Himself. Time and time again, Allah talks about looking, and He points to the people who believe in His book and who believe in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to tell them tells them to look at history. See how Allah dealt with the people who came before you. فَلَنْ تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا وَلَنْ تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَحْوِيلًا. If you look at how Allah dealt with the people who came before you, sometimes we look at history and we say, for example, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, people lived in a very poor state. We say, for example, that those people 100 years ago, they didn't really understand how the world worked. They don't understand nature, they don't understand the human body, they don't understand psychology. The more time progresses, the more science progresses, and the more we can understand our world. But Allah tells us that if actually you are paying attention, that there are times and that there were people who may actually understand the world and have more power in the world than you do. In a very famous example, in Surah Al-Fajr, Allah mentions that there were a people, وَثَمُودَ الَّذِينَ جَابُوا الصَّخْرَ بِالْوَادِ. There were a people like Thamud, like Aad, like Fir'aun. And some of these people, الَّتِي لَمْ يُخْلَقْ مِثْلُهَا فِي الْبِلَادِ. Some of these people, you think about our view of history, our understanding of history as we are progressing, we are improving, we are making our own lives better and the lives of our communities and our world better. Allah says, don't fool yourselves. There were actually people, التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد, that there was not a people who were created like them in the entire world. And this is, Allah is talking about people who came before. When you look at, for example, the amount of power Fir'aun had over his people, he could torture them and no one could say even a word. And it's not just torture. Some of the knowledge that people had before us, Allah says, look and learn. People who are stronger than you, people who are smarter than you, people who are better equipped than you are. Those people, look at their fate. لَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. You will not find a change in the sunnah of God, the practice and the tradition of Allah, the habits of Allah. وَلَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَحْوِيلًا. And you cannot divert the sunnah of Allah. If Allah determines that a people have reached the greatest level of sin and of injustice, then Allah is going to send His adab, His punishment, and He's going to erase any sort of trace of those people. لَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. That is based on Allah's determination. And we see this. We see this even in our own day. That human societies, they can continue. It is said that in South Africa, this apartheid state continued for more than a century. That you had a ruling class and that was colonizing and that was setting to one side the colonized, the people that it was oppressing, for hundreds of years. But then ultimately, that regime fell. And the mustad'afin, those who were oppressed, they are now lifted up. So at some time, in some places, in some circumstances, Allah destroys that unjust and unfair system through the hands of the ruling class. It is said that in the country of South Africa, it was a few politicians who came and had the courage to undo that system. After years of struggle, they weren't alone, but after years of struggle that occurred. In other occasions, Allah sent His damnation and His punishment from the heavens. And in yet other occasions, Allah, He commands the people who believe, those who are faithful, to go and fight for the oppressed. And so He says, وَمَا لَكُمْ لَا تُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. What is with you, O you people who are reading and listening to this book? وَمَا لَكُمْ لَا تُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. What is with you that you do not fight in the path of Allah? وَالْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ, meaning in the path of the mustad'afin, مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ. Why don't you go and fight for those who are oppressed, whether they are men, women, or children? Allah is commanding us to go and lift up whatever way we can. So we said, history tells us how we have gotten to where we are, whether it is in terms of our politics, whether it is in terms of our societies and our communities, and as well it tells us what is our ethical and our moral responsibility in the face of Allah's creation. But as well, history tells us who we are as human beings, as creations of Allah. When we look at history as a way for Allah to write His creation, Allah is writing for us not just Kitab al-Tashri', the book of the Quran. He doesn't just reveal the Quran as a book that we can read, words on a page. But as well, Allah reveals to us another book that Muslims have historically called Kitab al-Takween, the existing world that we see outside of us, that we see all around us. And Allah is writing this book, whether it is through the creation that we see around us, or whether it is through that history that Allah is writing for us. And so, if we are paying attention, then we can as well see ourselves through the history that Allah allows to continue, and that He is writing Himself. We can allow to see ourselves and our place in the larger creation of Allah, as part of Allah's khalq. And so history becomes one of the most important tasks that any Muslim, that any mu'min can undertake. And in particular, in these kinds of crises. I will mention a hadith of our fifth Imam, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam, where the Imam says, إن أصبت بمصيبة في نفسك أو في مالك أو في ولدك فاذكر مصابك برسول الله فإن الخلائق لم يصابوا بمثله قط. Understanding history gives us perspective. It allows us to fit and to understand where we can place our grief and our tragedy. And so Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, he tells us that whenever a calamity or a disaster befalls you, whether it is in yourselves, or it is in your wealth, or even in your own families, then always remember the death of Rasulullah. Because our connection to Rasulullah is what gives our lives meaning. And it is what allows us to continue. We tell people that no one should live, that a life without dignity is not worth living. And so if you have your boot upon the neck of any individual human being, then don't say, why do they resist? Because that type of life, a life lived under oppression, is not worth living. And that is the calculation that any people who resist and who try to desist in moments of oppression, that is the logic that they are using. A life under the boot of an oppressor is not worth living. And a life, according to us, Muslims who have the person of Rasulullah in our midst, a life that is separated from Rasulullah is a life without meaning. And so, if we don't understand the history of the Ahlul Bayt, then we cannot truly appreciate the source of meaning and of guidance in our lives. I don't know what to live for. I don't know what to get up for. That is another value in history. Now, we understand generally why history is important. And not just the history, and this is a very important point, we're not looking at history as a set of facts. When we're talking about history in the school of the Ahlul Bayt, and the history that we care about as Muslims, and that history that Allah mentions in His book, He is talking about that history that tells you why your life is significant and where you should direct your efforts in this life. And so it's not a history of facts. It's a history of meaning and of the guidance of Allah. That is the history that the Quran points to. And so that's why the Quran talks about the Anbiya. That's why the Quran talks about all of these different groups and all of these different people who were oppressed. And then a prophet comes and he lifts that group from the boot of the oppressor. And then finally, Allah brings it back to Rasulullah. Until a moment comes. These are the words of Lady Fatimiyya Zahra, salawatullahi alayha. Lady Fatimiyya Zahra, we are commemorating her death in these next few days. Lady Fatimiyya Zahra's life is a very beautiful and a very profound life. It is a life that was connected again back to Rasulullah. Of course, she is the daughter of Rasulullah. She is Abiha. We understand that Lady Fatima was the closest person after Amirul Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salam, to Rasulullah himself. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alihi. And she is the carrier. She is the heir and the inheritor of the legacy of Rasulullah. So if we want to understand Rasulullah, we really have to look at the life of Lady Fatimiyya Zahra. But unfortunately, one of the greatest tragedies of the life of Lady Fatimiyya Zahra is that we have so little information about her life. And so for those people who look at history as a set of facts that they now have to memorize, and this is sometimes our approach towards the events of Karbala, we sometimes ask, what day was it that the caravan of Imam Hussein entered into the land, into the plain of Karbala? How much water did they have? And when did their water run out? How many exact companions did Imam Hussein have on the day of Karbala? How many people connected to the Imam? How many people ran away? We collect all of these facts and we collect them in our minds and we distract ourselves from the actual meaning of Karbala. We might be able to do that with Karbala because you have stenographers, you have recorders in the plains of Karbala. on the side of Imam Hussein and on the side of Umar ibn Sa'd, the army of Yazid. But when it comes to the life of Lady Fatima al-Zahra, you don't have any of those facts. In fact, the life of Lady Fatima al-Zahra generally is filled with silence, is filled with a lack of facts. We know that she lived after the death of Rasulullah either for 75 days or 95 days. We know that she protected her father, Rasulullah, and she would heal his wounds when he would go out into battle, and when he would be injured, and when he would be struck by the enemy soldiers. We know that. And we know that she would take care of her father, and she would console him. And that whenever Rasulullah would pass by her house, Rasulullah would send his salam and his salat on the family of Lady Fatima al-Zahra. We know some of these facts. But the general life and biography of Lady Fatima al-Zahra is filled with silence. And so when we're approaching history, and this is a general lesson, but in particular when we're approaching the history and the life of Lady Fatima al-Zahra, we should be listening both to the moments that Lady Fatima al-Zahra is speaking, as well as those moments when she is silent. When you talk to a historian worth his salt, they are always paying attention both to moments where we have information as well as moments when we don't have information. In the case of Lady Fatima al-Zahra, this becomes very apparent. There's a moment, of course, many of us have heard this. That's Lady Fatima al-Zahra. She goes and she protests. Again, when an oppression occurs, a person who is oppressed has the right to raise their voice and to go and get their due, their right. And Lady Fatima al-Zahra, throughout her entire life, a woman, a lady who was quiet and who would not appear in front of other men. What was it that caused her to leave her home and to come now and enter into the masjid and to speak in front of men who are strangers, and some of whom she knows very closely? And she now comes and gives a khutbah that becomes famous throughout history. We have some books that our Shia ulama have collected from the akhbar of Lady Fatima al-Zahra. From, for example, the dhikr and the ahadith of Lady Fatima al-Zahra. For example, Shaikh as-Saduq, he himself has collected, he has written around 3 different books about Lady Fatima al-Zahra. One of those books that have become one of the most important legacies for the Ahlul Bayt is this khutbah called Khutbatul Fadakiyya. Maybe it's a khutbah that some of us are familiar with, but in these next few days, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on these words. Lady Fatima al-Zahra, she doesn't begin. Of course, this is in the context where the Khalifa of the time has taken away the lands of Fadak. According to Al-Bukhari in his Sahih, it is the moment when the first Khalifa, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa ala, has passed away, and now the Khalifa is shoring up his power. He hears about rumblings across the Arabian Peninsula. He sends out troops, and then he hears about rumblings and protests in the city of Medina. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, he refuses, along with the rest of the Banu Hashim, to come and give bay'ah to the first Khalifa. To shore up, inshallah we can talk about this tomorrow night in a little bit more detail, why did the first Khalifa go and choose this land of Fadak as the one parcel of land to point out and to focus on? Why did he choose it? Regardless of that question, we know in history, and in particular in reports that we have in books of School of the Ahlul Bayt and in other books, and in particular this is how Sahih al-Bukhari mentions it, that the first Khalifa, he goes to the land of Fadak, this small parcel of land outside the city of Medina, and he takes the parcel that belonged to Lady Fatima, and according to Bukhari, he also takes the parcel that belonged to Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet, and both Abbas and Lady Fatima to Zahra, they both come to the Khalifa in the middle of the masjid, Masjid al-Nabi. The body of the Prophet has just been buried. It's not a long time that has passed. Lady Fatima comes along with Abbas, and they protest this right that was taken against them, that was taken out of their hands. The response comes that I once heard that the Prophet Rasulullah himself said, نَحْنُ الْأَنْبِيَا لَا نُورَثْ. We prophets, we do not inherit, or we do not give as inheritance any land or any property. A hadith that only one person heard and that no one else among the Muslims can attest to. Even Fatima Zahra, the daughter of Rasulullah, is questioning this hadith. And then, the hadith continues, this report continues, that until Lady Fatima Zahra passed away, that she was angry and she did not speak to the first Khalifa until she passed away 75 days or 95 days after the death of Rasulullah. What is the reason for that silence? And what is the reason for Lady Fatima to come out of her seclusion? Moments when she is filled with grief, having just buried the body of her father. It is said that the reason Lady Fatima to Zahra spent only 75 days or 95 days, what she spent those days doing was crying and was shedding tears over the loss of her father. These moments were so difficult for Lady Fatima that Allah Himself has to now come and console Lady Fatima. One of the few ahadith that we have about Lady Fatima to Zahra is this hadith where Lady Fatima, it is said, according to the tradition of the Ahlul Bayt, that once when Rasulullah has passed, Allah now sends Jibreel himself. He sends Jibreel and Jibreel descends upon Lady Fatima to Zahra. This is a woman in tragedy. This is a woman in mourning. It is a woman that the people of the city of Medina could not bear to hear her cries. And so they tell Imam Ali to go and maybe build a small house, a small hut for Fatima outside of the city, so that we can be freed from her tears and from her crying and her wailing. And so it is said that Allah sends Jibreel down to Lady Fatima. One of the names and titles of Lady Fatima to Zahra is Al-Muhaddatha, because she could hear the words of the angels. And it is said that Jibreel, he comes to Lady Fatima to Zahra and he consoles her by telling her what is the place of her father now in the paradise of Allah. Don't have any fear and don't have any worry. Rasulullah is now in the greatest paradise of Allah. And it is said that Jibreel tells her about the events of the past, of the present, and of the future. And Lady Fatima Zahra, she is dictating these words of Jibreel, this revelation of Jibreel to Imam Amirul Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib. And this is what becomes of that book of Lady Fatima Zahra. This is that book. Again, the legacy of the Ahlul Bayt are the words and are the memory and are the spirit and the person of Lady Fatima Zahra. And so even if we don't know the facts of her life, we don't know all the details of her life, we take pride and we take solace that we have a person like Lady Fatima Zahra in our lives, and we welcome her into our majalis whenever we recite the name of Lady Fatima Zahra, or when we recite the name of Imam Hassan or Imam Hussein. We know that she enters into our majalis and she blesses those majalis, and so we welcome her. But the hardest moments for the Ahlul Bayt were those moments when Rasulullah has now passed away. When they see all of that rot that was creeping into the hearts of the Muslims, when all of that rot is now coming to fruition and is coming to the surface. And so Lady Fatima Zahra, those tears that are falling from her cheeks, these are not tears of what has passed. These are tears of what will come. And so it is said, for those 75 days, Lady Fatima Zahra did not take a break. And she would cry, and she would cry, and she would wail, and she would lament. It is said that Lady Fatima Zahra, she looked to her father, and she says, إِذَا مَاتَ مَيِّتٌ قَلَّ ذِكْرُهُ وَذِكْرُ أَبِي مُذْ مَاتَ وَاللَّهِ أَكْثَرُ. Imagine Lady Fatima by the grave of her father. She is crying. And she is citing these words, these verses, and she says, whenever a person dies, people begin to forget that person. His memory fades, and people stop reciting his name. But oh my Father, now that you have passed, now that you have left us, oh my Father, what type of person are you that your name is now spread throughout the land? What type of person are you that your memory becomes stronger and stronger in my heart? And it is said in those final moments of her own life, Lady Fatima Zahra, she does not think about her own body and her own pain. She doesn't think about her broken ribs and her broken heart. She doesn't even think about leaving Amir al-Mu'mineen all alone. It is said that in those final moments she says, As-salamu ala Jibreel. Ya Allah, she says, oh peace be upon you. O Jibreel, As-salamu ala Rasulillah. Oh, peace be upon you, my father. Ya Rasulullah. Ya Nabi Allah. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ.
Ya Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein,
إلهي يا جمال بهاء برهان خفاء دارمي بارون بهاء بن كشف الغطاء كي میرسه آقای ما بن قطع अंधेर हुआ फातिमा ज़हरा ने क़ज़ा की अंधेर हुआ फातिमा ज़हरा ने क़ज़ा की खेती हुई बर्बाद रसूले दोसरा की अंधेर हुआ फातिमा ज़हरा ने क़ज़ा की अंधेर हुआ फातिमा ज़हरा ने क़ज़ा की अंधेर हुआ फातिमा ज़हरा ने क़ज़ा की मोहसिन की शहादत का बहाना था क़ज़ा का मोहसिन की शहादत का बहाना था क़ज़ा का खोया के सितमगर ने मोहम्मद पे जफ़ा की अंधेर हुआ फातिमा ज़हरा ने क़ज़ा की अंधेर हुआ फातिमा ज़हरा ने क़ज़ा की या फातिमा कह के जो रोता है ज़माना या फातिमा कह के जो रोता है ज़माना गुरबत खेली जाती है रसूले दोसरा की अंधेर हुआ फातिमा ज़हरा ने क़ज़ा की अंधेर हुआ फातिमा ज़हरा ने क़ज़ा की बच्चे हुए बिन माँ के भरा घर हुआ खाली बच्चे हुए बिन माँ के भरा घर हुआ खाली हालत है बहुत गैर दिले शेर खुदा की अंधेर हुआ फातिमा ज़हरा ने क़ज़ा की अंधेर हुआ फातिमा ज़हरा ने क़ज़ा की मासूम आलम का उठा शब को जनाज़ा मासूम आलम का उठा शब को जनाज़ा यूं साहिब-ए असमत ने ज़माने से हया की अंधेर हुआ फातिमा ज़हरा ने क़ज़ा की अंधेर हुआ फातिमा ज़हरा
فاطمة يا زهراء 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 أمنا البحر والشطآن أمنا البحر والشطآن أمنا البحر والشطآن ينتجي فيهما الحيران قدرنا الكوثر الإنسان فاطم خصها الرحمن فاطم خصها الرحمن فاطم بضعة من طه فاز في الحشر من والاها والجحيم على أعداها وسبحان من سواها فاطم بضعة من طه فاز في الحشر من والاها والجحيم على أعداها وسبحان من سواها فاطمة يا زهراء فاطمة يا زهراء فاطمة يا زهراء فاطمة يا زهراء أمنا البحر والشيطان يلتجي فيهما الحيران قدرنا الكوثر الإنسان فاطم خصها الرحمن فاطم بضعة من طه فاز في الحشر من والاها والجحيم على أعداها وسبحان من سواها فاطمة يا زهراء فاطمة يا زهراء فاطمة يا زهراء فاطمة يا زهراء فاطم قدوة الأحرار قبرها السر للأسرار نعمة الله للأبرار بابها رغبة الجبار يا حنانا على العاصين قام نرجوك أن تسقينا كفك الحرز فلتحمينا ألجأ الغرق من يهوينا فاطمة يا زهراء غدا في القدس فاطمة فاطمة يا زهراء فاطمة فاطمة يا زهراء فاطمة فاطمة يا زهراء يا ندى الدمعة المخفية أنت حواؤنا الإنسية صارت الحجة الثورية باسمك نورنا مقضية باسمك نورنا مقضية يا زنادا على المتراسي عصبة لم تزل في الراسي يا أمانا أتى للناس فاطم باسنا العباسي فاطم باسنا العباسي فاطمة فاطمة يا زهراء فاطمة فاطمة يا زهراء فاطمة فاطمة يا زهراء فاطمة فاطمة يا
روی لبها نور و قدر و کوثر و طه ذکر نورانی عاشقها تسبیحات حضرت زهرا الله اکبر این همه جلال الله اکبر این همه شکوه الله اکبر در راه علی فاطمه ایستاده مثل یکو صلی الله علیک فاطمه صلی الله علیک فاطمه صلی الله علیک فاطمه صلی الله علیک فاطمه روی لبها نور و قدر و کوثر و طه ذکر نورانی عاشقها تسبیحات حضرت زهرا ذکر نورانی عاشقها تسبیحات حضرت زهرا الله اکبر این همه جلال الله اکبر این همه شکوه الله اکبر در راه علی فاطمه ایستاده مثل یکو میدونم که راز شهادت این اشکا رنگ خدا میگیرم من با تسبیحات حضرت زهرا الحمدلله که نوکرتم الحمدلله که مادرمی الحمدلله که از بچگیام مادر سایه روی سرمی صلی الله علیک فاطمه صلی الله علیک فاطمه صلی الله علیک فاطمه صلی الله علیک فاطمه از غصه ها چشم عاشقا شده دریا روزه بعد نماز ما تسبیحات حضرت زهرا سبحان الله باب بهشت و دود سبحان الله از لحظه ورود سبحان الله پیش چشم علی آیه های کوثر شده کبود صلی الله علیک فاطمه صلی الله علیک فاطمه صلی
باعث وانصر من نصر الدين واخذل من خذل المسلمين اللهم اشمل الظالمين بالظالمين اللهم ارزقنا شهادة في سبيلك اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى Inshallah, I keep all of the shuhada and those who are earning in these days of the mind and inshallah, we'll continue.